before hospitals, before anesthesia, before science could explain life. There was pain, there was fear, and there was birth. In the Middle Ages, bringing a child into the world was not just a moment of joy. It was a moment of risk, ritual, and raw survival. Tonight, you'll fall asleep to the story of how women gave life in a time when doing so could mean death. This is a history of whispered prayers, hot water, wooden spoons.
And bravery beyond imagination. This is a forgotten story of childbirth in the Middle Ages.
A time when every birth was both a blessing
and a gamble. Chapter 1, A Woman's Place, 201, 8, 30.
In medieval Europe, a woman's worth was often measured by her womb. To bear children, especially sons, was her duty, her calling, her identity. Marriage wasn't just romantic. It was practical, often arranged before she could read. Some girls were betrothed by the age of 7, married by 12, and pregnant by 13. The church encouraged women to bear as many children as God allowed. But God did not always make it easy. There were no prenatal vitamins, no ultrasound machines, no understanding of infection, blood loss, or anatomy. A woman in labor was in the hands of God.
And the midwife.
And even then, there were no guarantees.
Chapter 1, A Woman's Place, 201, 8, 30.
In medieval Europe, a woman's worth was often measured by her womb. To bear children, especially sons, was her duty, her calling, her identity. Marriage wasn't just romantic. It was practical, often arranged before she could read. Some girls were betrothed by the age of 7, married by 12, and pregnant by 13. The church encouraged women to bear as many children as God allowed. But God did not always make it easy. There were no prenatal vitamins, no ultrasound machines, no understanding of infection, blood loss, or anatomy. A woman in labor was in the hands of God.
And the midwife.
And even then, there were no guarantees.
Strich.
Chapter 2, The Midwife Arrives. When the first pains of labor began, the woman's world narrowed. She was surrounded by women, her mother, her sisters, a neighbor perhaps.
And at the center, the midwife.
She was not a doctor. She had no degrees. But she had seen things. She had caught dozens, sometimes hundreds, of babies. She knew what positions helped.
What herbs eased pain. What smells warned of death.
The midwife arrived with a bag of tools and faith. Inside might be
a small knife, linen rags, a bowl of water, a candle, a cross,
dried herbs tied in cloth,
a piece of blessed bread, and sometimes
a birthing spoon, for spooning broth between contractions. She would ask all men to leave the room. She would place charms under the bed. She would speak prayers under her breath, not always from the Bible. Because childbirth in that room was not medicine. It was mystery. Chapter 3, The Pain Without Mercy. Labor was not expected to be easy. In fact, pain in childbirth was seen as divine punishment. In the book of Genesis, Eve disobeyed God. And so women were cursed to bring forth children in pain. To complain too loudly was not just embarrassing, it was seen as rebellious. There were no painkillers.
No epidurals.
Just boiled water for washing and compresses.
Chutmint Lives for the mood. Rosemary smoke, tu cleanse er.
And the bite stick, a cloth-wrapped piece of wood to stop the woman from biting her own tongue. She could labor for hours.
Or days.
If labor stalled, the midwife might lift her arms, tie cloth around her belly, place her on a birthing stool with a hole in the middle, or lay her across the knees of another woman for support. There were no fetal monitors, only the color of her face,
The sounds chamade.
the shape of her belly,
And the prayers. Always the prayers. Chapter 4. When things go wrong.
Not all babies came easily. Some were turned the wrong way.
Some were too large. Some
Had stopped moving. There were no forceps. No cesarean sections. At least, not for living women. A C-section was only performed if the mother had died, in the hopes of saving the baby or baptizing it before it too passed. If a baby got stuck, the midwife might reach in, turn the child by hand,
or pull.
sometimes the child was saved,
Often it was not.
and sometimes neither mother nor child survived. Latin Cross Chapter 5, Baptism and Death. The Church taught that an unbaptized baby could not enter heaven. So baptizing the child, even in the middle of labor, was vital. If the baby was born weak, the midwife might pour water over its head immediately. If the child was stillborn, but appeared almost alive, a priest might perform an emergency ritual. If the mother died during labor, which was common, her body was laid on a plank of wood, arms folded, rosary in hand. Some families whispered that the mother had died in sin, that her pain had been punishment. But others wept, because they knew she had gone through hell to bring forth life.
And sometimes she paid the final price. Chapter 6. Before the birth, life inside are pregnant.
Pregnancy in the Middle Ages was not just a medical event, it was a spiritual and social transformation. A pregnant woman was both revered
And at risk.
Neighbors and midwives often said she was between worlds. No longer just herself, not yet a mother, and not fully safe in her skin. She might be offered herbal teas to soften her body, given warm beer to ease sickness, and advised to avoid sudden sounds, strong smells, or staring dogs, all believed to harm the unborn child. There were no pregnancy tests.
No ultrasounds.
The first signs came from missed cycles, nausea, and eventually, a flutter in the belly. Some called it the quickening, the first time she felt the child move. It was seen as proof of life, and sometimes even the moment the soul entered the body. Until then, no one could say for sure if there was a child inside her at all. Cyclone Chapter 7, Womb Myths and Medical Guesswork. Medieval medicine was a mix of ancient Greek ideas, folk wisdom, and superstition. Doctors believed the womb could
Wander trug the body like a wild animal. Shrink with sorrow.
expand with heat, and bite during delivery if offended. One theory held that babies formed from a mixture of male and female fluids, and the stronger parent would decide the child's gender and temperament. If the baby kicked more on the right side, it was a boy. If the mother craved sweets, it might be a girl. If she dreamed of fire,
Twins.
sometimes astrologers were consulted to predict the baby's future, based on the moon, the stars, or even a single sneeze. Truth and
Chapter
fantasy
8,
were
Church
woven together,
and the pregnant body.
because when so much
The
was
church
uncertain,
had many
opinions
belief
on the
filled the
pregnant
gaps.
body. It taught that sex was for procreation only, and even during pregnancy, marital intimacy was often discouraged. Some priests told couples to abstain from sex completely after conception, believing it could damage the child's soul or disturb its formation. If a woman died during childbirth and had conceived in lust, some claimed she had died as punishment. Women were taught to pray daily,
to confess often,
to wear blessed tokens around the neck,
and avoid the touch of unclean people.
Childbirth was not just biological.
It was a moral test,
one she might not survive.
Chapter 9: Cravings, Charms, and Protektionsspells.
Pregnancy cravings were not dismissed, they were feared. It was believed that if a woman craved apples and didn't get them, her child might be born with a red birthmark shaped like one. If she stared too long at a hair, the baby might have a cleft lip. If she watched a fire too closely, the baby might be born red-faced. So families tried to satisfy every craving. Cover mirrors, keep sharp tools away from her belly, and burn herbs near the bed to keep out spirits. One midwife's journal mentions placing iron scissors under the bed to protect from witches. Another describes hanging garlic near the door.
Fear was everywhere, but so was love. These charms, these rituals,
were not foolishness. They were a desperate hope that the child might live.
And the Mutter to.
Chapter 10. What did a pregnant woman wear? There were no maternity clothes in the Middle Ages,
but there were adaptations. Most women wore
a linen shift closest to the body, a long tunic or gown over it, and an apron or outer dress with side laces that could be loosened as the belly grew. Wealthy women might wear loose-flowing gowns with hidden panels, while peasant women simply unfastened or restitched what they already had.
Modesty was key.
A swelling belly was to be hidden, even though it was expected. And as labor drew closer, women often chose one gown to birth and be buried in, because they did not know which would come first.